One reader wanted to know about what summer bulbs or what bulbs can be planted in spring. And it's spring right now and a great time to plant. There's all kinds of cool summer bulbs you can plant at this time of year. The most important thing is to wait until the soil has really warmed up. Don't plant any of the bulbs I'm going to go over right now until it's warm enough for you to plant your tomatoes outside. But there's so many choices. You can do lilies, dahlias, caladiums, cannas, and even gladiolas, and we're going to go through all of them. The general rule of thumb is to plant them about 3 times deeper than their diameter, but be sure, regardless, to follow the instructions on the label every time. Also, you want to be sure to get the right side up on these bulbs. You'll see that there's a right and a wrong side to plant them. And here I'm going to show you a gladiola bulb, but you want to plant them with that root side, and you can see the tiny roots down. Root side down. Always remember that. And if you look here, I'll even show you on these lily bulbs, you can again see the roots on the bottom, and you can see the sprout coming out the top, so be sure to plant these. You would want to plant these, which are about 1 inch wide, about 3 inches deep. You can see all the different forms. This is dahlias, and this is the way they will arrive. You can see these are ready to sprout, a really healthy bunch of dahlias. And here you can see these are cannas. This is 2 different cannas right here. Wait, I'll separate them. You can see these each would need their own pot because these are going to get about 4 feet tall each. And here we have hardy gladiolas. And you can see how beautiful they are, but how distinct each of these bulbs are from the other. Now remember, your cannas and your caladiums like it wet. In fact, they like it so wet they can grow in standing water. You can grow those pots of those plants in standing water or in marginal places where you have mucky or really moist soils. Remember, as always, most importantly, water well right after planting. And besides that, you'll have a summer full of beautiful bulbs in your garden.
So we had a question from someone about what plants to cut back: monkey grass, liriope, fescues, etc. Monkey grass is also called lily turf or liriope. There's various species, and I'm guessing blue fescue is what you're asking about. And both of those plants, you can cut them back in late winter, early spring. You can shear them back to within a couple inches of the ground, and they'll be just fine. And as you can see, my liriope right here, I didn't get it cut back at all, so it looks horrible. And I do that a lot. Forget to cut it back on this little spot. So I think I'll just probably end up shearing it all back, and it won't look quite as good for quite a while, but it'll grow back. In fact, I've seen lily turf, people use it as a lawn substitute, and then they just mow it a couple times a year, and it looks really good. Blue fescue, a lot of times it's a cool season grass, so it's going to look good early in the season. A lot of times when I've grown that, I've just trimmed out the dead growth, and it looks just fine. But if it looks really bad, just go ahead and shear it back and it'll be fine.
Hey, we've had a couple of readers write in about their lilacs not blooming. There can be a handful of reasons why. You may live in a part of the country that had a late freeze, and if you did, that could have lost those early blossoms and you lose that bloom for the season. But next most important is lilacs need a lot of sun, at least 6 hours a day. So if you have one situated or trees have overgrown it, you may need to actually move that plant. Also, lilacs aren't really meant to be pruned, and so if you've pruned it, it may take 2 up to 3 years for it to recover from that pruning. And then also, lilacs may stop blooming with age. So if you have an old lilac, you have a couple of options that you may want to do. The first is to rejuvenate it, and that is to, over the course of 3 years, remove 1/3 of the branches every year. So by the 4th year, the plant will be totally recovered. Or you can completely renovate the plant. That's cutting the whole thing down to the ground, just leaving about 6 inches. Those are probably the best choices that you have, but we certainly all know there's only one reason to grow lilacs, and it's for these gorgeous blossoms.
On social media, we heard from Rachel, who set her amaryllis bulb out in the fall after it had bloomed, and she must live in a warm area where it can winter over outside, and it's now sending up more bulbs. So she wanted to know if that was unusual, and that's not unusual at all. Amaryllis will multiply, especially if they're outside. They'll actually form colonies of multiple bulbs. And you can see even our one here from inside will set up several bulbs. And you can divide those, and it's actually good to do that, especially if they're growing in the ground outside. Just wait till the soil's a little bit dry, and if you've got it in a pot, pull it all out, and then tease each bulb apart. Wait till those bulbs are about 3 inches in diameter before you split them off of the mother bulb. Anything smaller than that, you'll want to leave onto the bulb. So, sounds like your amaryllis is doing great. And if you wanted to get it to bloom again, there's a great article on our website, gardengatemagazine.com, and it shows you exactly how to get your amaryllis to bloom twice in a year. But you'll just need to add a little bit more fertilizer because that takes a toll on the bulb.
Hey, we had a question about when to plant caladiums, and I really love caladiums. They have beautiful foliage, big leaves. They're great in part shade to sun. But they can be a little pricey in the garden center when you buy them already growing in a pot. You can save a little money and get more plants by buying bags of bulbs. So I bought a few here, but you have to, if you're going to plant them in the ground, you need to wait until nighttime temperatures are around 65 degrees consistently at night, because they really like warm weather. For those of us in cold winter areas, it's a good idea to plant them in pots ahead of time. You can get a little jump on the growing season that way, and especially if your growing season is shorter. So then you'll have the foliage sooner. So usually maybe 6 weeks before you would want to put them outdoors, put them in a pot with potting mix so that it has good drainage, a couple inches below the surface. And if you want to look at your bulbs and see if they have a little bumpy surface, that's usually the way you put them facing up. But if you can't tell, if it looks just real irregular everywhere, just put them in and they'll be fine. It's not that big of a deal. But that's how you get caladiums started in the spring.
If you're a rose lover, you probably may order your roses online. If you get a mail order rose, it'll probably arrive to you this way with no soil. This is called a bare root rose. This is actually an easy elegance rose coral cove, and it is in its dormant state. And so you've got to bring it out of its dormant state. So unwrap it very carefully, and you may even need to use scissors to get it out of its wrapping. But you'll see you have a rose that is completely has bare roots. So to bring this back to life, the first most important thing to do is to soak it. It needs to soak in water in a bucket. We've got water in this bucket right here for at least 2 hours and up to 12 hours, but actually no longer. And if for some reason you're not able to soak that rose, be sure to sprinkle those roots with water and keep them wet. You got to get this in the ground within the first day or two. So the next most important thing is how you plant it. It's going to need a hole that's at least 2 feet deep and 2 feet wide. I'd also amend that hole with a couple shovels full of compost to boost it. And maybe in the center of that hole, once you mix that compost in that soil, make a little mound that you can actually sort of put these roots carefully around that mound. And your planting depth is very important. You can see right here, there's a swelling right here. This is the grafted bud. Keep this swelling about 1 inch above the soil. So your planting depth is going to be right here. Now, after you plant it and you get that in there, put about 2/3 of the soil in the hole, water it well, fill the last third of soil, water again, and you're good to go.
So we had a question on what's a good all-purpose fertilizer for perennials. And I like to use compost. A lot of people will put down a slow release in spring, and that works great too. But I like compost because it feeds the soil and then that feeds the plants. You get micronutrients and microorganisms working, and it holds on to moisture better, adds texture to the soil. It's just really good for the plants all around, and you just have to do it once a year. But there are some plants, perennials especially, that you want to keep in mind don't like a richer soil, so they don't even need fertilizer, like yarrow or tall sedum. If they're growing in rich soil, they'll have tall floppy plants or long floppy stems, and they'll be falling over all the time. So those are the kind of perennials you don't want to feed.
One reader would like to know how to add acid fertilizer into a soil once seeds have already been planted in that area. And it's true, you can't add your soil amendments like you normally would if you've already planted seeds in a spot. But You can use a water-soluble fertilizer for acid-loving plants. Miracle Grow has one, and actually lots of other companies have them too. And you just mix it up in your watering can and water it into the soil. Another option is a granular fertilizer that you can just use to top dress. And one organic option that I like is from the company called Happy Frog. And you would just sprinkle it on top of the soil at the rate recommended on the package. And that's a really gentle fertilizer that will still add some acid to your soil and lower the pH. So for example, if you're wanting to turn your hydrangea blooms from pink to blue, that could be something that could help you do that.
Hey, we've heard from some of you that you're having problems with your irises blooming. These are bearded irises that I just dug up and I'm ready to replant them. Irises will grow in shade, but they really need at least 6 hours of sunlight a day to bloom properly. But probably most importantly is how you plant them. The irises grow from these rhizomes, and when you plant them, you need to plant it right at or on the surface or just below. It's actually important for the sun to hit parts of these rhizomes to get great bloom out of the flowers. So remember, there's a relationship between planting these and letting the sun hit it. So be sure in the spring to pull back the mulch from your bearded iris to let that sun hit these for them to bloom their best.
So Scott has asked us what he should do to roses early in the season as they break dormancy so they'll get off to a good start. And it's really pretty easy. You just need to do feed, water, prune. And feeding is really simple. Just put down some compost first thing in spring and that'll feed your soil and it'll provide nutrients for the plants, the roots as well. Then then if you have a repeat blooming rose, like a lot of shrub roses are this way, after each cycle of bloom, because you'll have your first big flush in spring, and then there'll be a little pause, and then there'll be another big flush of blooms, kind of repeating itself 2 or 3 times throughout the season. Well, after those flushes of bloom, maybe put down some organic fertilizer. I like rose tone, that's an easy one to find, and it seems to do just fine. And then that'll give it that extra boost to really flower well again the next time. You also want to keep on top of watering because roses like water to stay healthy. Just be sure to water at the soil's surface and that will help cut down on problems like black spot. And also pruning. And pruning is a big thing this time of year. It's really, before they put leaves out, you can see the shape of the plant better and it's just easier to see what you're cutting and where. And for shrub roses, mostly you want to just cut out anything that has died, and you can tell because it's usually really brown and brittle or gray and brittle and breaks off pretty easily when you cut it with the pruners. And then look for, you can shape it up if there's like a stray stem sticking out, or if you have a lot of crossing stems that are kind of bigger in the center, you might want to cut a few out just so there's good air circulation and it cuts down on disease. But once you do that, you should have great roses for the rest of the season.
We had a question from a reader about growing citrus in containers, and I've done it for years, so I have some experience doing it, but it is a commitment. Number one, you have to remember that citrus needs a lot of sun, 8 to 12 hours of sun a day. So be sure when you bring it inside to place it in a south-facing window. If you don't get that 8 to 12 hours of sun a day, you may need to augment that with light bulbs, a full spectrum light bulb to give it all that light it needs. Also, citrus does not go dormant in the winter, so you have to maintain certain conditions in the house. So that means one of the most tricky things is moisture. They like to be wet, but not soggy. So that means probably watering about every 5 days. They also like high humidity, which is hard to achieve inside the house. So you may want to grow it in a pebble tray where that evaporating water underneath can add humidity to the air. And if you do that, I guarantee you, you'll have success. You'll do better with smaller fruits like Meyer lemons and calamandan and kumquats. They're easier to grow in a container, and they're easy to grow from seed. So I say try it, match those conditions, and you'll succeed.
Hi, I'm Kristen with Garden Gate Magazine. If you enjoyed that video, be sure to subscribe to Garden Gate Magazine's YouTube channel. There you'll find tips, design ideas, and how-to help for gardeners just like you. Click the bell so you can be notified every time we upload a new video.